I was looking at my favorite app to find free stuff when I saw the one for this string trimmer. Now the best part was that I had to drive to my local airport to a hangar where it was located at. But after getting it home, I'm not too optimistic about getting this one going again. And I know I shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but this one is a bit rough around the edges, which is something you can't overlook. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt branded string trimmer. And the problem is that, according to the ad, it won't start and needs some work to get it going again. The first thing that we need to do is inspect it for problems, and there are some things that are a bit concerning. The fuel lines are very hard and are now loose in their openings in the fuel tank. Now we'll need to replace them along with the purge bulb so they'll both last a long time together. Now because this engine is a 4-cycle, we need to check on the oil as well. And the good news is that there's plenty in there, but we will need to replace it at some point. Next up, we need to record all the stickers we can find, just in case we need to order some parts for it. Now because this machine's been sitting in an airport hangar for who knows how long, we're going to give it a quick bath before we start working on it. After the rinsing, I would recommend letting it dry off, but that is up to you. So there was something a bit disturbing about this machine, and that was the pull rope was really tough to pull. The engine is not stuck, and I don't think it's hydrolocked with oil or fuel since there's none in the tank. Now because this engine has valves, we need to check the clearances because if they're off, it could cause this problem. After taking off the plastic engine cover, we need to take off the valve cover to get access to the valves and the rocker arms. Also, with the spark plug out of the engine, I do want to make sure that the engine is free to spin over, which it was. But if it wasn't, it could mean there's a problem with the recoil system or something worse. Don't be surprised if the valve cover is stuck to the engine, and also be careful when trying to get it free. Now that we can see the rocker arms, I'm going to rotate the engine until one of the arms is all the way down while the other one is up and loose. Next, I'll take my 5/1000ths of an inch feeler gauge and slide it into the clearance between the rocker arm and the valve stem and see how it fits in it. And come to find out, it was loose in the clearance, which means we need to adjust it, but after we check the other arm. Next, we'll rotate the engine so that the arms switch places and check the other clearance with the same feeler gauge. Except this time the clearance is much too small, meaning we'll need to adjust this one as well. First, we're going to loosen that nut, which will open the clearance, then insert the feeler gauge and then tighten the nut until the feeler almost gets stuck. And once the feeler gauge just drags in that clearance, we'll then rotate the engine again to switch the arm's positions and make the same adjustments on the other arm. If the feeler gauge does get stuck, then just turn the nut the other direction ever so slightly. This type of inspection only needs to be done every couple of years, but you can do it as often as you feel like. Now before we put the spark plug back into the engine, I do want to check that the gap on it is where I want it to be. This is what I like to set my gaps to, but you're welcome to use a different value if you want to. So out of curiosity, I want to do a compression test, that way we can find out how healthy this engine really is. But because we'll be using the pull rope to spin it over, we won't get an accurate reading. But I would like to see a reading over 65 psi, and that's because of the compression release. So the reading is about 75 psi, which is really good, and if I had to guess, the actual reading would be about twice this much. Now that we know the valves are in spec and the compression is great, I think it's time to do a test start using fuel from our bottle. And because the rope is tough to pull, we'll try starting it on the ground. Luckily for us, the engine end started, so next up, we want to work on the fuel system. Now these fuel lines are very petrified, so who knows how old they are, but I doubt these are the original ones. And because there's no point in saving these, we'll just cut them where we need to make the job easier. And after getting the fuel filter out of the tank, we might be able to reuse it. However, after taking a closer look at it, it appears to have some corrosion on it, so we won't be doing that. Now typically, I wouldn't be taking the fuel tank off, but the inside of this one could use a good cleaning. We'll just spray some of my degreaser in it and then rinse it out with my sprayer. Next up, we'll take the carb off and inspect its condition and service it if we need to. On this type of carb, they don't want you to make any fuel adjustments to it, and you'll see what I mean when we take a look at it. So this resin disc is actually covering up the screw that you would use to make the adjustments. The problem is trying to remove this disc well enough to use our tools is almost impossible to do because of how it was filled. So let's hope we don't need to make any adjustments because we won't be able to. So this is the metering diaphragm, and its job is to control fuel flow through the carb. And to do that, it needs to be flexible, which it surprisingly is, which means we can reuse it. Now normally, I would take this further apart, but it seems to be stuck, and if I force it, I could damage the gasket, and that would not be good. But because the carb is in great condition, at least from what I can tell, we'll just move on. After pushing out the old purge bulb, we need to replace it, but just keep in mind that there are two different ones, so pick the right one. On this particular carb, we need to use the smaller one of the two bulbs, but in a pinch, you could force the larger one to work. Now to get around this, you could order a variety pack of bulbs, which would have both sizes included. But at least you'll get the one you need and a spare, but it will be the other size though. And finally, we get to install the carb back onto the engine. Just make sure the gasket between the carb and the engine is there and in the correct orientation. Otherwise, if it's missing or installed the wrong way, the engine might not run the way it's supposed to or not start at all. But if you're unwilling or even uninterested in taking apart the carb and sourcing the parts for it, then I would just order a new carb instead. This carb is still available and super affordable, so a replacement makes a lot of sense. Not only that, but the kits also include other parts such as fuel lines and filters. So I could have replaced the fuel lines while the tank was off the engine, but I'll put it back on since yours will probably be that way. The first line I'll be installing will be the fuel filter line, but you are free to choose. And to help get the line into the opening for the tank, we'll cut the end at an angle. This will make it just a bit easier to install, but this will still be quite the challenge. Now there are other ways to do this, but I always end up using this method most times. After cutting the angle piece off, we'll then install the fuel filter, and depending on what type it is, this might be a struggle. This one had a very large end on it, and it took me a minute to work the line on it. After getting the line onto the filter, we'll then push it back into the fuel tank. However, you need to make sure it's in a good spot. Where it is now is not where I want it to be, since the fuel will be more towards the front of the tank than the rear. We'll just pull the extra line out of the tank and then reposition the filter so it sits towards the front. Next up, we'll cut the fuel line close to length and then connect it to the brass port closer to the bulb. We'll then use the same method for the return line, but this one will be a lot easier than the filter line. The other difference is that the return line only needs to extend at least an inch or so into the tank. This should be enough to keep it from backing out on its own, but you're welcome to push more into it. After cutting the fuel line, we'll then connect it to the port further away from the bulb, but we will confirm that it is correct by testing the flow through the system. We'll just pour a small amount into the fuel tank, trying not to make a mess, and then test it. So when pressing on the bulb, fuel will come up the filter line, into the carb, fill the bulb, and leave through the return line and go back to the tank. So it did take several presses before we saw any fuel show up in the filter line, which is not promising. However, fuel is flowing through the lines just like it's supposed to, so hopefully it'll start and run for us. And the last things that we need to do is replace the top engine cover and that smaller cover under the muffler and the filter cover, then we can try and start it. Well, unfortunately, this is about as good as it's gonna get because I ended up struggling with it for about 30 minutes before I gave up on it. The carb will need to be adjusted, but with how this one is protected, it would be better to just replace it with an aftermarket one which is fully adjustable. Here's the problem though, I might not be able to sell this machine, so it may not be worth the cost of a new carb. More and more consumers are reaching for battery electric string trimmers these days, so saving this gasoline machine that also requires oil changes might be a tough sell in the used market. I might hold off on this one until I can find the right buyer who understands them, but that may take some time. So my question is, what would you do? Hang it back up in the garage or buy a new carb and try selling it in the springtime? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.